everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture, and as promised in yesterday's video, I am here today to take a deeper look into why the Disney deal failed. And to do that, I'm going to look at the recent Deadline article, which was titled "Why Disney Ditched Doctor Who," and it breaks down various explanations, various assumptions as to why the deal failed. So I'm just going to go through some of the points made in that article and give you my thoughts on them and discuss them a little bit deeper. So one of the first things that caught my attention when reading through this article was the implication that there was a complete lack of enthusiasm from Disney with regards to Doctor Who. This is the quote from the article. It said, "It was pretty apparent from early on that this wasn't for the long term," says a former Disney executive. Everyone got the impression that it wasn't doing what it needed to do on Disney Plus to be sustained. Another person close to Doctor Who adds, "The writing has been on the wall for ages. There has been a complete lack of enthusiasm over at Disney." Now, I don't know about any of you, but I feel that. I could sense that lack of enthusiasm from Disney pretty much from the word go. In terms of marketing, I feel like there were so many missed opportunities for Disney to market Doctor Who to a wider audience, to really sell this new franchise that they now had their hands on. And it kind of didn't happen at all. We had some trailers that were slightly different to the BBC versions, but only tiny details that you probably only would really notice if they were side by side. Obviously the Disney Plus logo was included in some of them, but there was an opportunity there for there to be so much put into Doctor Who from Disney to really get people excited about it. And I really do feel there was a lack of enthusiasm from Disney with regards to Doctor Who. When you think about merch that could have been sold, you think about Disney, you think about merchandise. And obviously there is a strong line of BBC merchandise for Doctor Who, and perhaps there were issues with regards to licensing and things, but I just feel like there was a lack of enthusiasm from Disney right from the beginning. And it only got worse as time went on, to the point where it just felt like they were just posting their obligatory announcements alongside the BBC when the time came, and they really had no interest in building up Doctor Who at all. Now, the other thing that you probably could consider with regards to the enthusiasm and the push for Doctor Who from Disney. There was a time when Disney Plus was really pushing for all that content. Think about how many Marvel TV shows there were coming out all at once. And that was under CEO Bob Chapek, right? But right as Doctor Who was signed to Disney, Chapek steps away from Disney as CEO, and a new CEO, which was Bob Iger, comes in, and he wasn't quite as content hungry as the previous CEO, and he wanted to scale back the spending on Disney, which then probably could have affected Doctor Who. So there could be argument for the timing being not right, and that, you know, the initial thought was there to build Doctor Who up, but the changeover of command kind of threw that all out of whack, and Doctor Who kind of got brushed aside and didn't get the attention that it perhaps originally would have got. I mean, we'll never know unless we had Bob Chapek and Bob Chapek and Bob Iger in the room and asked them those questions. But quite honestly, if I said to them, what are your thoughts on how Doctor Who was handled, they might quite possibly say, what's Doctor Who? Who knows? But yes, in terms of the enthusiasm from Disney, I do feel like it was lacking with regards to Doctor Who right from the beginning. Moving on, of course, we get to the topic of the ratings. So the article says, quote, "Doctor Who's performance has been far from stellar in the US. This year's season failed to register in Nielsen and Luminate streaming charts. The ratings were not up to much, someone involved in the series ruefully acknowledges." And then it later goes on to say, on the BBC, Doctor Who has seen an alarming drop-off in viewing figures. Okay, so there's two things I kind of want to look at with regards to the ratings and the viewing figures. First of all, when it comes to comparing viewing figures and ratings, it's quite difficult in the current climate of television. Because when you look at the viewing figures for something released now compared to something 5-10 years ago, the metrics are just completely different, because things are not released as they once were. It's not if you don't catch it live, you're going to miss it until it's then on BBC Three tomorrow at 4 p.m. In the age of streaming, looking at 24-hour viewing figures is not necessarily the best way to measure how many people are actually watching your show. Now, a lot of comparison might be made to something like The Traitors, for example, and they might say, well, The Traitors has got X number of viewers every night that it's on. And that is true, but the difference is that Doctor Who is such a different type of programme. The Traitors is the kind of thing, I'm just using this as an example, but The Traitors is the kind of programme that people watch as it airs, and they watch it every day that it's on while it airs, but it's not the kind of programme that you're going to look at and then 3 months down the line decide, I'm going to rewatch The Traitors. That's the kind of programme that is very much an in-the-moment thing to watch, whereas Doctor Who is something that has rewatchability. It's something that 3 months down the line you might decide, actually, I'm going to binge all of this season of Doctor Who. And so actually I think when you look at things like Doctor Who, you need to consider the 28 days ratings and viewing figures, because it is something that slowly builds over time, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's designed in such a way that you now don't have to watch it as it airs, as it drops. It's more accessible to people who don't have the time to watch it at 6 p.m. on a Saturday. And so when you're looking at the viewing figures and they are always lower than they used to be, you have to consider those other factors as well. So sometimes I think the viewing figures is something that isn't necessarily that beneficial or helpful to look at in terms of how successful something might be. In terms of it being far from stellar in the US, I think this can circle back to the point I just made about the lack of enthusiasm and marketing, because as much as there are plenty of viewers and fans outside of the UK, Doctor Who fundamentally is a British institution. It's a British programme. And so it's naturally going to have a bigger UK fan base than anywhere outside of the UK. And when Disney takes on something that has a big audience in the UK but isn't necessarily so well known outside of the UK, and then does very little to kind of push it to any new viewers, you're only relying on those existing viewers outside of the UK to bulk up those viewing figures. Whereas the intention should have been to bring in new viewers, but the lack of enthusiasm, the lack of marketing meant that that didn't happen, and so you only had those existing viewers and the select few who might have stumbled across it on Disney+. But you didn't really sell it. Disney didn't do much to really sell Doctor Who to a wider audience. They just gave it a platform outside of the UK. But naturally, the viewers are going to be majority UK viewers because it's something that's existed in the UK for 60 plus years. So I think it's hard for them to measure that when they didn't put the effort in to really build the viewership in the US beyond just having a platform for it to be watched on. And existing viewers, as we've seen in the comments of our previous video, would have found ways to watch it without Disney if they really, really wanted to. So I think that is something that needs to be considered. Did you do enough, Disney, to really build the viewing figures outside of the UK? And if you didn't, can you really be surprised when it comes to the viewing figures and you haven't really built up much of an audience? Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is something else I've seen in this article, and I think one thing has led to the other. And that is, it also spoke about there was also a serious lack of awards buzz around the series. I don't like that this is something that was considered when Disney took over Doctor Who, because to me it feels like Hollywoodization of Doctor Who, and Doctor Who has never been this big Hollywood show. That's not the point of what it is. And if Disney are putting so much effort into trying to make it an award-winning, Emmy-winning Hollywood thing, then that tells me they're not putting the focus on the things that make it fundamentally what it is. That then, in turn, means that those British viewers, the BBC viewers, are watching something that they know very, very well, have grown up surrounded by, has existed within our atmosphere for 60 years. And all of a sudden, the fundamentals, the basis of this show that we've known and loved and seen change and evolve over time, but still has those core elements, suddenly aren't there anymore. Then you lose your UK viewers as well, because you've changed what is the core of Doctor Who in favour of trying to focus on the things that are going to win awards, the special effects, the choreography. Oh, there's a choreography category for the Emmys or whatever it is. So let's put this wacky dance number in this episode, regardless of whether it fits or not, because then it could be eligible for winning an award for that. If that's the focus, then you're changing what makes Doctor Who what it is. And so you're taking a risk by trying to do something different to win the award, but by taking that risk, you're losing the viewers who have stuck with the show and watch it for certain elements that suddenly feel like they're not being prioritised. So I think that has actually caused the ratings to drop as well, the focus on the wrong things. I don't know, let me know if I'm completely wrong here, but I feel like I'm onto something here. What do you think? So something else that was mentioned was regarding Ncuti Gatwa and the idea that he never fully embraced the role of the Doctor. So the article says, quote, "A Doctor Who source says the show suffered because Gatwa never fully embraced the role. There is more to that role than performing," this person says. "You've got to be an ambassador for the brand and embrace being that generation's Doctor. Matt Smith and David Tennant fully understood the responsibility it carried." I think to a degree there is a fairness there in what's being said. It's very difficult. I think Jodie Whittaker actually was a great ambassador for the show as well, and still is to this day. So to not mention her here maybe feels a little bit like there's some bias towards the kind of the golden era of Doctor Who, the Tennant and Matt Smith era of Doctor Who. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think they've purposely left out Jodie. But it is interesting to hear this idea that Ncuti Gatwa hasn't fully embraced that. And there is a degree of truth to it, in as much as there has been a lot of gossip and talk about issues behind the scenes. We obviously know that he left before he was supposed to leave, and there have been whispers and rumours that perhaps he was a little bit difficult behind the scenes, maybe a bit of a diva. I've heard that from various sources. How much truth there is to that, I don't know. But I do feel like, compared to other actors playing the Doctor, there wasn't a lot from him in terms of putting in that extra effort as the Doctor, which isn't necessarily a requirement of the job, but it does kind of, when you think of David Tennant and Matt Smith, you almost imagine them dressed as their character to go and see some sick children. And I'm not saying they actually did that, but there are times when they did do things that maybe were beyond what they were expected to do, whereas I feel like in the last couple of years, Ncuti Gatwa has done the things that he was expected to do, but not much beyond that. I don't know how much that says for whether it impacted the show itself, but I do feel like with the reduced episode count, especially, we never really got a chance to get to know Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor as a character. And because we didn't really have much opportunity to see Ncuti Gatwa being an ambassador for the show outside of the obligations, you didn't really feel like you got a sense of it outside of the show as well as inside of the show. I don't know whether that speaks for more of an age or his age. It's interesting because Matt Smith was very young when he took on the role of the Doctor, but I feel like at that time, things like social media and everything weren't as big of a thing. And so it is interesting. This is the first time really we've had a Doctor who is of an age where, you know, social media and public image and all those things are much more important to perhaps the individual, and there's kind of an air of having an image to uphold, or things that they do or don't want to be doing. They don't want to be typecast. I don't know, unless we again sat down with Ncuti Gatwa and asked him these questions and he was willing to answer them. We don't know what his thought process was, what his ideas were, how he approached the role of the Doctor and all of the responsibility that came with that. So further down the article, we have the dreaded political climate and too woke for Disney comments. This is what the article says, and I quote, "Another well-placed industry source says Doctor Who became too woke for Trump's USA, and this was a factor in Disney minds when it came to a renewal. Disney is incredibly unlikely to ever admit that politics were a factor in Doctor Who's cancellation, but Jimmy Kimmel's brief suspension was revealing of the company's desire to minimise MAGA wrath." Yeah, I don't really have much to add here. The article basically spells it out here in this quote. That's the mindset of some people with regards to Doctor Who. Now, obviously, Deadline here does mention the Jimmy Kimmel suspension. So that does maybe indicate that that was a factor in Disney's minds, perhaps, maybe. But having said that, it's no secret, we've already learned from other things revealed in this article that Disney has kind of been feeling quite lukewarm towards Doctor Who for at least the last year or so. So I don't think that this was the biggest issue with regards to Disney's decision making for moving forward with Doctor Who. I think if the season 1 had smashed the ratings and it had been a raving success, well, I wouldn't be sitting here making this video. Disney would have renewed the contract ages ago, and we'd probably have season 3 by now. Having said that, though, it is clear from the outcome that we have had that Disney clearly weren't happy with some elements of the deal and with Doctor Who as a whole. So, you know, perhaps this was one of the things that pushed it over the edge, but again, we just don't know. So further on down the article, it does talk about the future of the show, and it does suggest that the show will probably have to take a big budget cut moving forward, and how that might be for the better. This is what the article says, quote, and you'll notice I'm smiling here because just want to say I've been saying this the whole time. It says, quote, "Others point out that some of Davis's cheaper episodes were his best, such as season 1's 73 Yards, which was praised by critics and Whovians. Budget limitations used to help the idiosyncrasies of the show," adds an executive who used to work on Doctor Who. "Big budgets can cause a problem. A huge variety of voices tend to push towards the mediocre, but then the budget was nowhere near as big as shows like The Mandalorian, so they were stuck in the middle. You can have planets, flying cars and robots, but ultimately you're always going to get better versions elsewhere." What have I been saying the whole time? I honestly think this is one of the biggest reasons that this era has failed. Because there is such a thing as too much money, and these last 2 seasons have kind of proved that. All I've been saying for the last 2 years is that I feel like the focus has shifted from good storytelling, good character development, good relationship building in favour of how can we show that we've now got a big Disney budget. Let's throw all the money we can at it and build this giant unit HQ in the middle of London. And let's have this giant LED screen that could be used when actually we could have just filmed it in a quarry and nobody would have cared that we'd filmed it in a quarry, because that's what Doctor Who is. And this is right. Some of the simpler episodes are some of the better episodes because we don't need extravagant special effects. Doctor Who has never relied on extravagant special effects to be successful. So to have here more confirmation that this is part of the problem, I mean, it makes me feel quite good because I've been saying this the whole time. I don't care how much money the show has. I genuinely think take the money away, if you don't have the money, you're forced to rely on the things that you do have, which is your writers, which is your actors. I don't care if it's in a quarry. I don't care if it's on a council estate. I don't care if the whole episode is set in one room, as long as the story is gripping, the characters are engaging, the relationships are believable and well established. That's all I care about. You could have a whole episode where you never see the monster, but if it's creepy enough, if it's built up well enough, it actually doesn't matter. Take the Vashta Nerada, for example. It's just shadows. You literally never see a monster, and yet it's terrifying. And I feel like the focus has just been completely shifted in this Disney era to focus on all the things that I liked Doctor Who for not using. I didn't want it to be this big Hollywood thing. If you were to ask me, out of all of the things that have been listed in this article, I think one of the biggest things to have made this deal fail is that it's tried to change Doctor Who into something that it fundamentally has never been and shouldn't be. And what's interesting is actually back in March 2024, this is what Russell T Davies said, quote, "If Disney collapsed tomorrow and we had to go back to making Doctor Who on a normal BBC budget, you know what? We'd all rally round and make it, and suddenly the stories would become claustrophobic ghost stories." Good. Give me claustrophobic ghost stories. I'm totally fine with that. That is Doctor Who to me. It's not about how extravagant can we make this episode, how much money can we spend on this episode. I really don't care about those things. If you've got a monster that looks a little bit weird and wacky, all the better. That's part of what Doctor Who is. That's what it is. You need to be able to look at that monster in 10 years' time and go, that hasn't aged so well. That CGI's not great. That's what we want. So quite honestly, if moving forward Doctor Who goes back to being just on a BBC budget, being scaled back down to what it always has been, I would be absolutely fine with that. In fact, I would be really happy if that happened. Obviously, we don't know what the future holds. Deadline did hint at a possible avenue for the show moving forward that actually almost came to bear before Disney. They said, quote, "We understand that prior to Disney Plus and the BBC striking the co-pro deal, an alternative option was presented to then BBC drama boss Piers Wenger, which would have raised up to £5 million an episode without input from a big American player. This plan could yet be revisited." I mean, if you can get more money sensibly without involving a big American company who's going to want to try and Americanize and Hollywoodize the show, do it. But don't ever, ever, ever prioritize money over good storytelling. That is my message to the BBC. If anyone watching is at the BBC on the Doctor Who team, for the love of all that is holy, prioritize story and character over money. Obviously, I know money literally is everything to everyone in the world. Money is what makes the world turn round. I get it. But if you want your show to be successful, prioritize the stories, prioritize the characters. Just take a look back at RTD1. Take a look back at the classic era. Take a look back at even the Stephen Moffat era. That is what we want to see. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have I completely missed the point? Am I completely wrong here? Or am I actually talking some sense? Let me know in the comments down below. But remember to be kind. You don't have to agree with me. That's fine. But don't make it personal, huh? Anywho, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're looking forward to the war between the land and the sea, which we will, of course, be covering when it releases in December, whenever that might be in December. So keep your eyes peeled for that. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of River Song herself, goodbye, sweeties.